San Francisco may not leap to mind when someone mentions the best train watching spots in America. Sure, the city by the bay has plenty of stellar tourist attractions, not the least of which is the Golden Gate Bridge. But mention rails, and the first thing that probably comes to mind are San Francisco's famous cable cars. Fisherman's Wharf may be a tourist mecca, but it can't match the train-watching spectacle of Burlington Northern and Santa Fe's racetrack in Chicago. Of course, San Francisco is merely the center of what is known as the Bay Area. And when it comes to the drama and variety of contemporary railroading, the San Francisco Bay Area takes a backseat to no one. San Francisco Bay. As far as the mariners of the 1800s were concerned, it was an ideal harbor, a shelter from inclement weather, blessed with broad inland waterways and rivers. But the sailor's dream was the railroad engineer's nightmare. The bay cut off rail access from the east and the south, and any problem that tidewater didn't create was complicated by mountains. Perhaps the best way to understand the problems the early railroads faced is to follow the path of our story around the Bay Area. We'll start on the Peninsula Corridor between San Francisco and San Jose, the route of the first railroad to reach San Francisco. We'll follow Southern Pacific's coastline from the CP Coast interlocking at Santa Clara to the end of the line at Oakland. There, we'll hook up with SP's Cal P line to Sassoon, where we'll connect with one of Northern California's newest short lines, the California Northern. Then we'll wrap things up on a short line of a different flavor, the Napa Valley Railroad, operator of the renowned Wine Train out of Napa, California. The San Francisco skyline looks down on the route of the old San Francisco and San Jose Railroad, which completed a line between its namesake cities on June 6, 1864. A year later, the railroad incorporated the Southern Pacific Railroad and launched a project to build a transcontinental railroad that would span San Francisco and New Orleans. By the time the tracks reached Tres Pinos in 1871, the investors had changed their minds in favor of a route through the San Joaquin Valley. Although it had fallen short of its transcontinental goals, the Peninsula Line survived as a critical link in the SP system. Double-tracked in 1904, it was the only rail route that didn't depend on ferries to bring passengers and freight to and from San Francisco. And it was the north end of SP's coastline route from Los Angeles, shorter and more scenic than the later San Joaquin route. Southern Pacific was the only so-called steam road to operate commuter service west of Chicago. Dubbed commutes, the trains were more than a couple of trips into San Francisco in the morning and out at night. This was an all-day and evening suburban service that operated in both directions between San Francisco and San Jose. But SP's commutes weren't immune to the changing commuter patterns sweeping America after World War II. Improved roads and a post-war appetite for new automobiles triggered a decline in ridership and revenues. In May 1977, the SP, citing a $10 million annual loss, petitioned the State Public Utility Commission to discontinue the Peninsula commute service. Salvation came in the form of partial fare subsidies provided by San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties. As it turned out, the same voters who had underwritten a portion of the original San Francisco and San Jose Railroad. State sponsorship of the commute service arrived in the form of Caltrain, which contracted with SP to provide crews, rolling stock, and related services between 1980 and 1992. In December 1991, SP sold the line to the 3 counties. Operational responsibility shifted to the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board, which retained the Caltrain name for the service. The JPB, in turn, signed Amtrak to run the commute service, an arrangement that continues to this day. And while the names of the operators and agencies have changed over the years, the Peninsula commute song remains the same. Today, some 24,000 weekday riders rely on these trains. Service has grown from 60 to 66 weekday trains, many of which operate 30 miles beyond San Jose to Gilroy. Peninsula commuters ride in 73 double-deck coaches known as gallery cars, operated in push-pull mode. Eastbound commutes from San Francisco operate the conventional way, with the locomotive pulling. Westbounds, on the other hand, operate with the locomotive pushing. The engineer rides in a cab car that controls the locomotive at the opposite end of the train. The locomotive that does the pushing and pulling is an F40PH, one of 20 diesel-electric units built in 1985 by the Electromotive Division of General Motors, known as EMD. Each F40 cranks out 3,000 horsepower, a portion of which feeds an alternator that supplies electricity for train heating, lights, and air conditioning. With 441 units sold between 1976 and 1989, the F40 has proven to be the locomotive of choice for most North American commuter railroads. Not that the F40 isn't without its critics, especially in Caltrain's Peninsula commute service.
The F40s is sweet and sour. Railroad management loves them because they're very dependable. They accelerate very well. Here in the Bay Area, most of the engineers here, we basically hate them. The negative side of it is we hate the noise that they make. They're extremely noisy. They ride rough, and we've always thought that they were too light. The noise inside the cab is, OSHA says it's not beyond the tolerances of doing damage to ears, but now it's mandatory that Amtrak mandates that you have to wear hearing protection, earplugs. But how many years did we use these units without? And the engine is constantly running in run 8, just like it's working hard, accelerating. Even when you come into a station and stop, or if you get delayed, and you're like there 3 or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, where the engine just sits there and it just screams, you know. I think back east they call them screamers. We have some short days, 4 and 5 hour days, where we just make one trip to San Jose and back. But then we have the long day where we work 10 hours and 20 minutes, and you only get about a 45-minute break in that, and that's what we call the double, the dreaded double. And in this pool here in San Francisco, we make about 22, 23 stops between San Francisco and San Jose in one direction. We stop at every community on the peninsula, and from San Francisco to San Jose is just solid, you know. So we make a lot of stops. Tough on the brakes. We have a lot of cracked wheels. That's just the nature of the beast. You don't get a chance to kind of relax and take in the scenery. You constantly have to be on it, you know. The cab car is extremely quiet. It's the same environment as the passengers. You're up high. There's no nose. Oh, that's one of the other things we don't like about, at least I don't like about the F40. Very short nose if you hit anything. The difference in the cab car is that you're up high, and then you can go right out the door in case you hit something. If it's that big, you can exit right out the door, right down the aisle with the passengers, you know. Whereas in the locomotive, you're there, basically. There's nowhere for you to go. But the cab car is so much quieter, and it rides better.
Caltrain F40s aren't the only locomotives you'll see on the Peninsula line. Southern Pacific 7615 is another EMD diesel, a 3,000 horsepower GP40-2 assigned to the South City switch job, the last freight to serve San Francisco. Three major railroads once served San Francisco: the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, the Western Pacific, and SP. These tracks being salvaged near Pier 36 are all that's left of the Western Pacific, which bailed out of the city in the wake of its 1982 merger with Union Pacific. Santa Fe lasted a few years longer before abandoning its yard on China Basin and retreating to its East Bay terminal at Richmond. SP lingered in San Francisco to watch office buildings and vacant lots replace most of the city's heavy industry. To make matters worse, the marine traffic moving through the port of San Francisco was shifting to containers. The port of San Francisco declined in favor of ports in Long Beach and Oakland, which had plenty of dockside space for cranes and container storage. It may be hard to believe that this lone SP locomotive and its handful of cars is a vestige of what was once the Southern Pacific lines. Like the octopus that novelist Frank Norris once compared it to, SP Rail stretched from its headquarters in San Francisco to reach St. Louis, Memphis, and New Orleans. As late as 1995, the SP served 15 western and southwestern states over some 14,500 miles of track, including this humble section under the wheels of the South City switch job. In 1996, SP was acquired by the Union Pacific Railroad. UP promised it wouldn't make any significant changes in operations for at least 18 months. Even so, the merger has resulted in a spaghetti bowl of UP trackage in the Bay Area that can be confusing to anyone unfamiliar with the pre-merger routes. To keep things simple, we'll refer to UP's former SP lines as the Southern Pacific. As for the switch job, we can't say whether it will survive the changes UP has in mind for the Bay Area. All we can do for now is enjoy a slice of urban railroading at its best. There was a time when the sight of an SP freight at Bayshore wouldn't have been worth a second look. After all, Bayshore Yard was once SP's main terminal in the West Bay. The sprawling facility consisted of 64 yard tracks, 21 repair tracks, a roundhouse and car shops, and a hump yard for switching by gravity. In 1921, for instance, Bayshore handled over 42,000 cars a month. In later years, Bayshore served as an overflow yard for Bay Area freight, but declining traffic and a move to cut costs prompted SP to close both Bayshore Yard and its roundhouse in 1982. Whether or not 7615 ever visited the Bayshore Roundhouse is open to speculation, but from the time the shop opened in 1906, it hosted thousands of steam and diesel locomotives. Even in its waning years, Bayshore did everything from sanding and fueling to painting locomotives. Today, the shell of the roundhouse is all that remains of the Bayshore engine terminal. The F-40s on passing commute trains skim past without a second thought. For them, home is the Caltrain engine facility in San Jose. But Bayshore once tended SP's commute engines, including some of the most interesting commuter engines in North America, SP's hulking Trainmaster diesels. It's hard for us to reconcile what happened to Bayshore and hundreds of other terminals around America in the past decade or so. On one hand, the roundhouse is a monument to the railroad renaissance that began in the mid-1980s and continues to this day. Railroads have hauled more revenue ton miles in the last 5 years than at any comparable time in the history of the industry. What's more, they perform the task with fewer employees, including those who once worked at Bayshore. The result has been record profits for the industry. And yet, we can't help but feel that the rebirth comes at a price. We've lost places like Bayshore, where people once gathered to inspect locomotives and change out worn driving wheels, where the air smelled like lube oil and diesel exhaust, and you could hear the murmur of shop workers talking about broken crankshafts and fried traction motors. How many pipe fitters fretted over steam engine boiler tubes inside the roundhouse? How many hostlers eased a switch engine out of the roundhouse and dreamed of the day when they'd be promoted to engineer? Yes, the stockholders are richer for the changes that have come to Bayshore, but we can't help but feel poorer for what's been lost. The skeleton of Bayshore Roundhouse isn't the only remnant of freight railroading in San Francisco. The Golden Gate Railroad Museum uses a pair of Alco diesel-electric switchers that once toiled for the San Francisco Beltline. The 58-mile short line served San Francisco's waterfront until the railroad folded in 1992. Yet preservation is secondary to the primary function of number 25, operating as part of the museum's rent-a-locomotive program.
The rent-a-locomotive program is a new effort by the museum. It's a fundraising effort, essentially. But it also offers people who have no opportunity to get on a real live locomotive and operate it. The locomotives range in size from a 65-ton GE switching locomotive to the 2472 itself. The 2472 is a Pacific operated main line, still operates main line in California, and the prices range anywhere from $75 an hour for a GE switch engine to $300 an hour for the steam locomotive. We've had people from age 5 to age 82 operate locomotives in this yard.
Today's student is Julia Hirsch, a 30-year-old psychology student from San Francisco. She knows nothing about number 25's days shuffling freight cars at Pier 43 and a half, let alone how to operate the 52-year-old locomotive. But she's about to learn.
Basically, we'll take each individual and we'll take a look at the engine, and I generally go over and explain what type of locomotive we are operating, whether it be a steam engine or whether it be a diesel engine, and we go through the basic fundamentals of how it works. We do have hand signals. Before the person comes on the engine, they go through a little preliminary test as to a stop sign, a come ahead sign, a go away sign. And what I generally will do is when I have the pupil in the locomotive, I show them. And in the case of today, which was a diesel-electric Alco built in 1945, why I showed them basically where the selecting lever is. We had the engine running, how to put it in reverse, how to put it in forward motion, and what it feels like to open the throttle. And of course, when the contacts engage into the traction motors, why the engine starts to move. And it's a feel of actually moving the locomotive and stopping it, and that's basically what we do.
Now let's give it another little more here right now. All right, let it set up.
Okay.
Get it set up real quick. All right, now go back there. Be a brake brake. Turn on the brake brake. There we go. Walk with this brake on. Very good.
Two hours later, Julia climbs down from the Alco's cab and receives her student engineer certificate. For number 25, it's just another day, another dollar. But that's not how Julia feels.
It was awesome. It was really exciting.
especially the first moment when the engine engaged, it was pretty awesome. I realized immediately how much power there was there, and it was a little scary, but I felt very well taken care of. Yeah, stopping was a little bit scary, because to really get the feeling of easing back and forth so that it didn't just come to a crashing stop all at once, and gave me a real respect for people who do this with a whole lot of cars behind the engine. That's something from my childhood that just it evokes so much to me. You know, it really reminds me of being a kid up in the country in the mountains and hearing that whistle, and then actually feeling the doing it with the rope was really something. That was great.
When it comes to awesome train watching spots, the CP Coast interlocking in Santa Clara isn't exactly SP's Tehachapi Loop. Located 44 miles south of San Francisco, it appears to be little more than a wide spot on the tracks, but the junction's nondescript appearance can't hide its operating significance. At CP Coast, Caltrain's Peninsula Line connects with SP's Coast Line, also known as the Mulford Line, between this point and Oakland. For example, eastbound trains from Oakland use CP Coast to connect with the Peninsula Line. 4.5 miles later, they rejoin the Coast Line at CP Michael, 2 miles south of San Jose. From there, most trains continue down the Coast Line to Los Angeles, the same route used by Amtrak's Coast Starlight. The Starlight isn't the only Amtrak train we'll see as we head north on the Coast Line to Oakland. This train at San Jose is a Capital, part of Amtrak's Capital Corridor between here and the California state capital of Sacramento. The trains are sponsored by Amtrak California, a partnership between Amtrak and the California Department of Transportation, known as Caltrans. The schedule consists of 4 push-pull trains a day each way between Sacramento and Oakland, 3 of which go on to San Jose. Part of the nearly $250 million that Caltrans has spent on improving the service includes this streamlined locomotive, one of 9 EMD F-59 PH diesels. Dubbed California locomotives, the F-59s produce 3,200 horsepower and sport a paint scheme unique to Amtrak California equipment. Ten miles north of Santa Clara, the coastline passes the salt marsh fringes of South San Francisco Bay. The salt ponds in the foreground are the result of dikes, which restrict the natural circulation of the salt water. Over time, the salt from the ponds is harvested and processed nearby at the Leslie Salt Company. 3 miles south of Leslie Salt, the coastline slices across one of 2 nondescript bridges in the middle of the marsh. We're smack in the middle of the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge, the largest urban refuge in the country. But the wooden structures sinking into the marsh on either side of the tracks aren't shelters for the waterfowl and shorebirds that winter here. They're the shells of cabins and lodges where people used to live, and they're all that's left of what was once the thriving community of Drawbridge, California. In 1877, an upstart railroad called the South Pacific Coast started to build a narrow gauge line between Alameda, near Oakland, and Santa Cruz, an open port on the Pacific Ocean. To cross the same marsh that the coastline crosses today, the South Pacific Coast had to bridge an island formed by 2 tributaries of San Francisco Bay, Warm Springs Slough and Coyote Slough. To solve the problem, it built a pair of iron truss swing bridges that could be manually opened for boat traffic. When the railroad built a 2-room cabin halfway between the 2 sloughs, Drawbridge was born. The bridge tender's 24-hour-a-day job was to open the bridges by hand crank when a boat blew its whistle for passage. It wasn't long before the bridge tender's friends began to show up to take advantage of the unspoiled fishing and hunting that the marsh had to offer. Apparently an entrepreneur at heart, the bridge tender began to rent his cabin for 50 cents a night. By the time the railroad reached Santa Cruz in 1880, Drawbridge was home to another structure, the Gordon Gun Club. It had a unique Dutch carved roof allegedly inspired by the profile of the passenger cars at the time. It was a typical Duck Club cabin with 2 rooms, a combination kitchen living room, and a bunk room. SP leased the South Pacific Coast in 1887. 2 trains stopped at Drawbridge at the time, a westbound train to Santa Cruz in the morning and an eastbound in the evening. The stopover became so popular with hunters that SP named the stop Drawbridge, and the island became known as Station Island. By the time SP converted the line to standard gauge in 1907, Drawbridge had 2 hotels and about 79 cabins that were either duck clubs or private residences. Most of the cabins were built 50 feet from the tracks, which were called Main Street. Each house had an elevated walkway to the tracks, where SP charged $1 a year for the privilege of setting the walkway on its right-of-way. The sloughs provided another transportation option: boats. Almost everyone had at least 1 boat for hunting and for simply getting around town. The residents of Drawbridge were a hardy, independent breed. They loved the sport and wildness of the place, the marshes that hosted thousands of waterfowl, and the unpolluted sloughs that afforded a home for crabs, oysters, striped bass, and salmon. Take Nellie Dolan, for instance. She started going to Drawbridge to visit her father in 1910. Nellie came to love the island as much as her mother and sister hated it. Nellie bought her first house in Drawbridge in 1932. She married 3 times and divorced 3 times and always came back to Drawbridge.
Nellie Dolan was the belle of Drawbridge, and I feel a connection to what she must have gone through, being sort of a tomboy, if you will, in the early 1900s, wanting to get away with Dad and go waterfowl hunting and get out into the marsh. And just the idea of being able to get away and kind of rough it for a little while, and even rough it forever, as some folks did, and become permanent residents there. Just the idea of being able to live in an area like that where you're surrounded by nothing but wild lands is just really appealing to me, especially in today's day and age, when it's difficult to get away, just to think about what it was like at that point in time. It's really exciting.
Clouds began to gather over Drawbridge in the 1930s. Residents and businesses in nearby Newark and Fremont were pumping out the fresh water under the salt marsh faster than it could be replaced by nature. Deep wells on Station Island began to fail, and the island began to sink, forcing residents to jack up their homes repeatedly. At the same time, the growing communities in the South Bay were dumping their raw sewage into the bay. The natural dilution and filtering abilities of the marsh was overwhelmed, which devastated the water quality of the sloughs around the island. Waterfowl began to abandon the marsh, which diminished the hunting that made Drawbridge an idyllic place to visit and live. In 1955, the 2 drawbridges were replaced by a trestle, which ended the need for a bridge tender. Passenger trains no longer stopped on a regular basis, although they could be flagged down for a ride. But the trains themselves, like the commutes, were threatened by the growth of highway traffic. When local newspapers described Drawbridge as a ghost town filled with antiques left behind by the departed residents, the town was besieged by thieves and vandals. Faced with these problems, many residents bid Drawbridge a sad farewell and abandoned their homes, which were often vandalized and burned. The last resident left the island in 1979 after he was bought out by the National Wildlife Refuge, which now manages Station Island. The refuge has no plans for Drawbridge. Wind in the marsh will continue to take their toll on the remaining buildings. And 20 or 30 years from now, there'll be nothing left of Drawbridge but memories. Niles Interlocking is a perfect example of the spaghetti that resulted from the merger of the UP and SP. At one time, the palm trees around the crossing looked down on the trains of Western Pacific and Southern Pacific. Today, the crossing is the sole responsibility of UP, although Amtrak's capitals use it as well. Perhaps the easiest way to explain Niles is to follow the path of several trains through the interlocking. For example, this train is headed east on the Hayward line from Oakland. On the SP system, trains are labeled eastbound if they're moving away from San Francisco. The train will take the Centerville line to Newark, 5 miles from Niles. Then it will head geographically south to the coastline at CP Coast. The next train is a UP double stack peeling off the Canyon Sub, the former Western Pacific Main line to Stockton. Since the UP-SP merger, Canyon Line trains have used the Centerville line to reach Newark, where they turn geographically north to Oakland. Amtrak makes the next move through the interlocking plant. This capital is eastbound from Oakland on the Hayward line. Like the SP-powered freight, it will take the Centerville line to Newark. Then it will turn geographically south and head through Drawbridge and CP Coast to its terminus at San Jose. The next move is UP-860, called a light engine because it's running without cars in tow. The locomotive is an EMD GP40-2 like the SP unit used on the South City switch job. It rolls off the San Jose branch and heads west on the Canyon Sub. Facing north on the Hayward line on its way back from its namesake station is the westbound Hayward Local, which is actually facing north. It's waiting for a westbound Amtrak train, which rolls onto the Hayward line from the Centerville line on its way from San Jose to Oakland and Sacramento. After Amtrak clears the crossing, the Hayward Local takes a right turn onto the Centerville line. The unusual locomotive on the point is an EMD lease unit painted in the company's colors. Finally, UP-860 heads east across the Hayward line, this time with cars in tow. It'll continue east as it works local customers on the Canyon Sub. One railroad you won't see at Niles Interlocking is the Niles Canyon Railway. The tourist railroad operates 1-hour round-trip rides over 12 miles of the former SP through Niles Canyon.
We're a group of volunteers dedicated to preserving our railroad history and heritage. And the reason we selected Niles Canyon is we rebuilt actually a portion of the original Transcontinental Railroad. And this was completed in 1869, where a passenger could get aboard a train in Philadelphia or New York and ride all the way to the West Coast for the first time. And this line was abandoned by the Southern Pacific in 1984. And we decided it would be an ideal location to operate our historic railroad equipment, which we have acquired and restored and are operating on the Niles Canyon Railway today for the benefit of future generations, we hope, that will be here for a long, long time. And the scenery in Niles Canyon is much the same as it was when passengers traveled over the railroad 100 years ago. There's no commercial development or housing projects to mar the scenic beauty. So that's another advantage of us being here. The two engines we're using today, actually three, because we're running the little skunk rail bus. We call it a skunk because of the fumes from the engine that people nicknamed it a skunk back in the 1920s. It's a passenger carrying rail bus, self-contained. The diesel that hauls us from Sunol down to Niles is actually a very old diesel. It's called a vintage diesel. It was built in 1946, right after the end of World War II, and it was built for the U.S. Navy, and for many years it ran down at the Naval Supply Center in Oakland. The steam locomotive, which pulls the train back up the canyon, is very old. It's 73 years old. It was built for a short line up in northeastern California. One of our members acquired it when they had no further use for it years ago, and our members spent 4.5 years restoring it from the frame up to operate here on the Niles Canyon Railway. So we feel very fortunate in being able to pull that train with a vintage steam locomotive and give passengers kind of a nostalgic reminiscence of the good old days.
principal Bay Area station for the long-distance passenger trains of SP was in Oakland, specifically the Oakland Pier. Opened in 1882, the pier came to be known as the Oakland Mole, ostensibly because of the long causeways and trestles necessary to reach deep water. Despite what its name promised, you couldn't ride SP's City of San Francisco to its namesake city. You had to get off the train at the Oakland Mole and take a ferry for the last 3.5 miles to the city. Still, the pier was a lot closer to San Francisco than San Francisco International Airport is today. But that didn't halt the decline of the pier and the ferries after World War II. It cost less to charter buses between Oakland and San Francisco, especially when you factored in the cost of maintaining a fleet of ferry boats. Shortly after bus transfer facilities were added to SP's 16th Street station in Oakland in 1950, the Oakland Mole closed. Today, an intermodal cargo facility occupies the spot where passengers once stepped off elegant passenger trains for a romantic ferry ride across San Francisco Bay. At least fate spared the SP interlocking tower that once governed traffic on and off the pier. You can buy a soft drink and a hot dog and grab a table on the renovated second floor of the old tower. There you can sit and imagine what it must have been like when the SP operators threw the levers that controlled the interlocking switches, or how the tower trembled at the passage of the San Joaquin daylight. The closing of the Oakland Mole didn't foretell the abandonment of Oakland as a major rail terminal. You can stand in the middle of Jack London Square on the city's rehabbed waterfront and watch Amtrak and UP freights thread their way down the coastline, which runs right down the middle of the street. Rail fans often talk nostalgically about railroading's golden years. According to Trains author George Drury, the golden years happened 5 years before any of us began taking pictures. Fortunately, you can experience Oakland's golden years every day, from dusk to nightfall. Local rail fans often gather at Amtrak's Jack London station for the arrival of the Coast Starlight. The Starlight has a special place in the hearts of SP fans, perhaps because the train follows the route of SP's old Coast Daylight. Sure, the Genesis diesels that power the train are a far cry from SP's streamlined diesels or the railroad's handsome GS series steam engines, and there's no mistaking SP's single-level coaches for Amtrak's bi-level superliners. But train time in Oakland is still a concert of anticipation and quiet drama, regardless of which railroad is performing the music. And in the shadows and reflections of the station lights, who's to say you can't catch the spirit of the SP passenger trains that once served Oakland? Considering how important Oakland has been to the SP, it's fitting that the spirit of the railroad has been made flesh in a locomotive leased to the Oakland Terminal Railroad. Not many years ago, SP 5623 was just another EMD engine on SP's roster, an aging GP9 that had seen better days. Little did the locomotive know that its darkest days were just before the dawn.
One of the members of the club happened to mention to Howard that he had seen this particular engine going to the scrapyard, and we, on a Saturday, we got to talking and saying, wouldn't it be nice to preserve it for history, because it is kind of a historic engine. We took a look at it and thought, well, what we could find, there's nothing really wrong with it other than what the SP said they had trouble with. Now, over a cup of coffee, we decided that we could come up with the money if we could get it cheap enough. Between the two of us, we just go ahead and buy it, and this is a big toy. It's modeling on a grand scale. It's just something that nobody else has. This paint scheme was the first diesel color for the Southern Pacific when they finally settled on a paint scheme. And this engine was bought brand new with this paint scheme, and it was the first hood-type engine to come that way, the first, in the first group of engines. Before that, the covered wagons or F units were painted in this scheme. When we decided to paint it, we decided we'd bring it back to its original appearance. It was missing parts the railroad had cut off that they didn't need anymore. The unique part about it are the dual lights, the gyro lights. They had gyro lights on the front, but they didn't have gyro lights on the back, so we had to get gyro lights and put them on it. There was some skirting that used to be on the bottom, on the lower end, that they had cut off for maintenance problems, and we duplicated the skirting and put it back on. And then the biggest problem of all was the 8 commute engines that the Southern Pacific bought in the 50s had a special curved pilot to simulate a steam locomotive. And this engine had one on the back, but they had removed the one in the front. In the same scrapyard a few months later, another engine, the sister to this engine, came in, and it still had the pilot on the back. So we dickered with the scrapyard and bought it for $200. They brought it out and we put it on. So now it's basically as it was in 1955 as delivered. The main reason we bought the engine was to save it from the scrap and to preserve a piece of, I mean, just to make money. We could have found other engines there that might have been easier to fix because we didn't know how much trouble it was going to be. We bought it for all the wrong reasons. We bought it because of our heart and because of, because of our heart. We kind of fell in love with the little thing, and that was it.
North of Oakland, the character of the SP changes dramatically. The marshes and interlockings that dot the coastline between Santa Clara and Oakland give way to sailboats and shoreline on the Cal P line between Oakland and Martinez. SP's Cal P line traces its history to the Northern Railway, chartered in 1871 and completed to Martinez in 1878. Ferries connected Crockett, 6 miles west of Martinez, with the south end of the California Pacific Railroad at South Vallejo. Traffic then moved on the so-called Cal P from South Vallejo to Sassoon, where the tracks made a beeline for Sacramento. The joint Northern Railway Cal P route was shorter and had fewer grades than Central Pacific's route through Niles Canyon. The CP's reaction to the upstart railroads was to lease both of them in 1876. By 1879, the railroad had built a spur south from Sassoon to the shore of Carquinez Strait at Benicia. Ferries took entire trains across the strait to Port Costa, 4 miles west of Martinez. The ferries are long gone, replaced in 1930 by a drawbridge across Sassoon Bay between Martinez and Benicia. But their demise didn't tarnish the attraction of the Cal P line as one of the premier train-watching spots in America. Between San Pablo and Pinole, the SP operates within sight of its principal rival in the Bay Area, the former Santa Fe Railway. In 1983, the two competitors had merged around their minds, but the Interstate Commerce Commission annulled the proposed SPSF railroad 3 years later. The ICC forced parent Santa Fe Southern Pacific Corporation to divest itself of one of the railroads. SP was sold to the Denver and Rio Grande Western, which adopted SP's colors and named the new company the Southern Pacific Rail Corporation. Santa Fe, meanwhile, found solace in the arms of the Burlington Northern. The two married in 1995 and strolled down the aisle with the rather ungainly name of Burlington Northern and Santa Fe. Although UP and BNSF freights still operate within sight of each other between San Pablo and Pinole, it's not BNSF's Bay Area showcase. The railroad really comes into its own in Franklin Canyon. With SP's water level route already in place along San Pablo Bay, Santa Fe was forced to find another way from the San Joaquin Valley to San Francisco Bay. The answer? A 13-mile line that tunneled through Franklin Ridge, the wall that separates the two canyons which constitute Franklin Canyon. Granted, the line may not be as dramatic as BNSF's Cajon Pass crossing in Southern California. On the other hand, eastbound trains face a modest 1% grade, considerably less than the 2.2% eastbound grade on Cajon. The BNSF merger brought BN Green diesels to Santa Fe trains that were already colorful. That's because the pre-merger Santa Fe had diesels painted in two paint schemes. Units delivered before 1990 sport blue car bodies and a yellow war bonnet based on the red and silver war bonnet scheme introduced on streamlined diesels in the 1940s. The war bonnet design came full circle when the Santa Fe reintroduced the red and silver scheme as part of a marketing concept called the Superfleet. The idea was to sell the speed and reliability of Santa Fe's intermodal service by capitalizing on the image of the company's famous passenger trains. The Superfleet scheme has been retained for all BNSF diesels purchased for intermodal service, albeit with BNSF on the car body instead of the words Santa Fe. The Sassoon Bay Bridge is a hard act to follow. At 5,603 feet, it's the longest and heaviest double-track railroad bridge west of the Mississippi River. It consists of 22,000 tons of steel, 105,000 cubic yards of concrete, and requires 20,000 gallons of paint for just 3 coats. The 328-foot-long span provides 135 feet of clearance and can be raised in 90 seconds, considerably faster than we could climb to the top of the bridge. By comparison, Suisun seems a bit tame. For one thing, it takes its name from the Indian word for west winds. Considering how hot this area of the Sacramento Valley gets in the summer, it might as well stand for hot air. Then there's the Amtrak station, the one that serves Suisun and nearby Fairfield. Granted, it dates back to the 19th century, but you wouldn't know it from the extensive modernization it's undergone. Maybe our problem is that everything looks a bit too modern, a bit too clean. It's just not the broken down SP that many of us have come to know. SP's bedraggled spirit seems more comfortable at the south end of town. If UP follows past practice, they'll scrub the SP right-of-way clean of outdated structures, such as this wooden passenger car near the Suisun Yard office. More's the shame. Suisun is also the connection with one of Northern California's most successful short lines, the California Northern Railroad, known as the Cal Northern. In the late 1980s, SP began to examine its route map and eliminate lines that were marginally profitable. By selling or leasing these lines to short line operators, SP was able to concentrate on profitable routes such as the Cal P line. At the same time, it could count on the spin-off short line for interchange traffic, and thus the Cal Northern was born.
Well, California Northern was established in 1993 by David L. Parkinson, who was our chairman and CEO. 2.5 years after he founded and started the Arizona and California Railroad, which is our sister railroad. California Northern at that time consisted of approximately 378 miles of railroad, encompassing the NWP subdivision, which runs from Shelville to Willits, the West Valley subdivision, which runs from Davis to Tehama, the West Side subdivision from Tracy to Los Banos, a 60-mile line, and the area here in Napa Valley running from Suisun to Shelville and down to Vallejo. We handle approximately 38,000 carloads a year of mixed commodities, primarily steel, lumber, food products, pipe from the Napa Pipe Corporation. We have unit solid waste trains that are generated by the Southwest Napa Waste Management Authority, is handled by Rabanco Industries, and that train runs from California Northern here in Napa Valley from the Rabanco facility to Roosevelt, Washington by way of California Northern, Southern Pacific, Union Pacific, and then Burlington Northern for the final delivery. That service started up in June of 1995, and we're kind of proud of the success. We've enhanced that traffic, their marketability of that traffic and that service by our service. We work very hard to make sure that the inbound empties are placed on time. We're very proactive with tracing inbound empties. Once the outbound containers are loaded and released to us, we immediately move it to the SP at Fairfield Suisun. So from that standpoint, we have assisted in the marketing efforts. I believe that Rabanco has done a very good job also in pricing their product properly. It's been very strong. It's unusual that it's seasonal. You wouldn't think it is, but shortly after the first of the year, business drops off in the trash industry. It has been growing, and it's a solid customer, and it's a solid project for us. I think it makes a world of difference when you focus on being a customer representative. We all wear different hats. We take the time to respond to each crisis or each need, if you will, anytime we're getting an inquiry from a customer. We have a group of people on board now after 3.5 years that is one of the finest groups of people that I have ever really had the pleasure to work with, and there isn't anything that any of them wouldn't do to jump in and help. We're now operating with 11 GP15, 1500 horsepower locomotives. We, prior to divesting ourselves of the NWP subdivision in July of 1996, we had 18 total locomotives, 14 GP15s and 4 SD9 dynamic brake locomotives. We have now we're operating with 11 locomotives. They're all GP15s. We're very proud of that fleet. Our superintendent of motive power does an excellent job in maintenance for these locomotives. We have them power washed once a month. We're very keen on our image to the public and to our customers. So anytime you see a California Northern locomotive, it will be clean and it will be operating cleanly. So we're very proud of them. It's been a very good fleet, and they've really done the job for both us and our customers. We run strictly on a horsepower per tonnage requirement basis. We don't allow anybody to use more power than is absolutely necessary, so we'll put 3 15s on a 40-car train to take them over the hill. We have a 2% grade over here between here and Fairfield. Well, our traffic is pretty diversified, which is not only by line segment, but also, you know, totally within the organization, within the entire physical plant, and that's good. We're not heavily dependent on any one commodity. Should the market go sour on one commodity, you know, you can end up trying to figure out what you're going to do to make up for it.
Appearances can be deceiving. This, for example, is not an SP train on the branch line to Napa in the 1950s. For one thing, SP had stopped running passenger trains on this line many years before. And even in passenger days, this line never saw a train as unique as the Napa Valley Railroad's wine train.
The line here in Napa Valley was laid in 1859 by a man named Samuel Brannan, a fur trader from San Francisco. And he dreamt of a place like Saratoga in upstate New York. A bunch of his friends were sitting around one night, and somebody said Calistoga. And the rail line and the town was basically born from there.
When you have people coming on for lunch, they either have a first seating in the dining room, which means they would board directly into the dining room and start their dining service. And we have white linen and china and crystal in the dining room. And then they spend about half the trip in the dining room. And then approximately halfway through, they move into a lounge car, and they have dessert and coffee and whatever they'd like to have. We have after dinner drinks available. We also have the wine tasting bar. They can do that on the way home. But we have the best wine tasting bar, 25, 30 different wineries. There's no one winery you could ever go to that would offer that. Here we have it all on board. You go in there and you pick and choose 4 tastes from 25, 30 different wines. Wineries, not just wines, wineries.
The service, excellent service, okay? And naturally the scenery, my God. Where can you go in a restaurant and have this scenery changing every 60 seconds, you know?
Oh, it was great. It was great. It was our first time here, and we really liked the scenery, and everyone was really, really nice.
Basically, as far as the train goes, these are all 1915 Pullmans. They were fully restored. When we acquired them, they were shells, just metal shells. and they're all originally sleeper cars, so that's why they have such a high ceiling, that they were originally for sleeping cars. And this is all Honduras mahogany. These cars were restored at $750,000 per car, so it was a huge investment. And Vincent DiDomenico wanted these cars to look just right, and he worked very, very hard to do what he could do. These window panes are original pieces. Very, very little was original, and everything else. The cars never looked this good when they started. Even at their best, they never looked this good.
The Napa Valley's diesels are as remarkable as the rest of the train. Like the San Francisco Beltline switchers, they're an Alco design, but these are cab units built for passenger service. The grille around the headlight and the flat cab face are unique to these engines, which are known collectively as FAs. Napa Valley's 4 units were built in the 50s by Montreal Locomotive Works, Alco's Canadian subsidiary. For more than 20 years, they hauled passenger trains for Canadian National, then went to Via Rail when that agency assumed operation of most Canadian intercity trains in 1978. They're vintage machines, from their unique Type B trucks to their 1,800 horsepower engines. In fact, the only major change that the Napa Valley Railroad shops made to the FAs was to convert their original steam heat generators to head-end power, similar to those found on Caltrain's F40s. As much as the Pullman cars and the wine train staff, they're a part of what makes this train special.
My father thought that this would be a very nice way to see the valley, introduce people to something, I think, and, well, we all like to think that something that has been lost over the our generations. Train travel is something special. I like to think of maps as tell us where to go, and the Napa Valley Wine Train tells us how to go.
Wine trains pulled by vintage cab units. A chance to run your own locomotive. Commutes. Fast freights. A railroad ghost town. In our opinion, these things alone qualify the Bay Area as a terrific train watching location. And that doesn't include the rest of the great railroading you'll find on the rails around the Bay Area.
Thank you for watching this edition of the Ultimate Railroading DVD series. Look ahead to future installments as together we rediscover the past, present, and future of the world of trains around us.